Welcome everyone to the 9 Plus Learnathon. I put my name here, but just because all the names wouldn't fit in here, we have almost 10 Nimers that work on this Learnathon. And we are here today to learn how to build reliable and reusable components. This Learnathon is not a Learnathon for people that never used KNIME before. It's for people that are already friendly with the tool, but they want to be able to create those components they can share that anyone else can reuse and understand how all of that works. So as we go through the concept, I think that the best way to do this is to actually open KNIME and show you a quick example in a live demo. So let me now close the PowerPoint and switch to KNIME. And let's, for tonight, just open a brand new workflow, and we're going to call this KNIME Pros workflow. And there we go. There we are. We start with this new workflow. I'm here maybe adding a CSV file here, an example that I have, which is the airline dataset. You may have seen this before. And we have many different columns here that we are importing in these CSV columns. And we can actually look at them really quickly and see that this table has around 30 columns, right? I can even write it here. Those are flights, and we have all data about those flights, when they departed, when they were supposed to depart, what is the airline company, and so on. Now, what's interesting here is that not all of these columns should go in the analysis, especially if we want to look at the prediction of the delay for those flights, which this is the use case. Some of those columns have too many missing values, too many constant values, too many unique values. So how do we get rid of some of those columns? Now, you are a KNIME Pro, you joined the KNIME Pro Learnathon, you know we have many nodes to do this. For example, we have the missing value column filter node, which we can use to get rid of columns with, let's say, at least 50% of missing values. These columns have too many missing values. Let's just get rid of them, shall we? And we can see right away that we got now to 29 columns. So that kind of reduced a bit the data set to 29 columns. And we can keep going like this. Another node I like a lot is called the constant value column filter node. And I can add it and still remove a few other columns, all the ones that are constant. I execute this time, and we get to, let's see here, 27 columns. So as you can see, this is how you're probably already friendly, how you clean your data in KNIME, getting rid of those columns that you don't need because it's dirty data and you just want to clean it, right? Now, there is more stuff that you can do. For example, with a simple column filter, you just add a column filter node and you use your domain expertise. So for example, if you look here through these columns, you can see that we want to look at the delay of those flights, but there's so many other measure of delays that we want to take out. So we can, for example, select all of those, select them out, and go ahead with those nodes like this. And so at this point, we got to something like 20 columns. And this can go ahead and ahead. For example, something that people like to do is to use correlation, right? For example, to use linear correlation, and then after that, add a correlation filter to remove columns that are highly correlated. The problem with building a workflow like this is that if you know what you're doing, it's super fast. But when you need to do this with a lot of different data sets, it can sort of take some time every time to find the right sequence of nodes, to change the settings, and to also know those nodes. And let me show you a way that could be much, much quicker to reuse a workflow like this over and over again without having to build it every time from scratch. Yes, I'm talking about components, and I'm talking about a special one. So I'm going now here to open the KNIME hub. So I go to View. There is this panel, which is in Order, and then you write here Hub. It should be open by default, but this way you do not miss it for sure. And when you open it, which is here on the side, you can look for interactive column filter, which is in the end what I would need to do this interactively in a faster way. I press enter and it opens to me automatically the app, and this amazing interactive column filter. Monty, who is in here in the call, shows us an example here. And this example is featuring a component which has a really detailed description of what's happening here. And we have even one CUDA here, and we can actually find it. Now, what's here interesting is that I can take this component and drag and drop it in my workflow and use it right away. So let me show you how that looks. I take this component here and I drag and drop it in my workflow. So I take the component and I'm now replacing all of those nodes with a single component that I need to configure first, tell me this is my target, the delayed columns. I open the interactive view, and as this component measure the correlation, how many missing values, how many unique values, how many constant values, we have a dashboard that we're able to use to quickly filter out, based on all these metrics, all the columns. So for example, here we have this relevance. The relevance is taking into account the biggest of those values, that is the percentage of unique values, of constant value, missing values. So in this case, if I'm leaving this filter by default, I have here, which is always constant, or cancel in cancellation code, which is both all constant and here all missing. And then we have here, for example, another one, which is 93%. There is like here as 87% of unique values. This is always unique to the different rows, these categorical values. So I can get rid of them simply by moving this to 50%. And then let's say that there is some domain expertise that we need to apply. Interactively go through the columns, and in a much nicer way than the column filter, I can simply write in here delay and take away all those features which are components of the delay. Another example is to write here time, and I can see here the departure time for those flights and what it was scheduled. The delay in the end is a difference between those two values. So if I want to predict delay, I cannot really add those features in my dataset. I click close and apply, the component re-execute, and on the output, I can see that I filter quickly up to what is here, 11 columns in a single component. So as you can see, this is nice also for the fact that always works no matter which data set you're using. You have minor configuration to say what is your target column, but also really important, you can package what is done in the interactive view in a single node. Let me show you. So here, if I wrote workflow executor and I add this node here, and then I go in the setting and click auto adjust ports, you can see that I created a node that is able to filter the data just the same. So here again, I filter the data, I execute this, and this is basically a way to reuse this column filter wherever I need. This is an example on how you can use someone else's shared component. But let's say, for example, that I want instead to go here and customize something. I can always update the link here to check if there are new updates that we push to the app or the author did, or we can go and customize the component by disconnecting the link. If I disconnect the link, I can finally also change something in the component. We can see here that the component has some complexity, but let's say, for example, that I do not want this integrated deployment, this capturing of the column filter. It's just too complex for my use case, so I'm just going to remove it. Now, if I go on the outside, I can then customize my component ports to my needs by removing this additional port. And maybe by going to component and setup, I cannot just change the port, but I can also say, for example, a renaming here to call it simple. Now I created a new component called interactive column filter simple, and I want to share it with the community so that everyone can reuse it. And to do that, I will need to go on KNIME app, connect to my KNIME app profile, which is the same profile you have for the forum, and then create a new space dedicated to this kind of project. So I go create new space, and I select here a public space. We can call this new simplified filter, and I can then go ahead and create it. Now I create a new space, and I can share this new component on the space. I right-click, component again, and then share. I go on KNIME Hub, I select new simplified filter, this new space I created, and I simply share the component there. Now, what's interesting is that now already it's available. If I write here interactive column filter again, and open the app, I can just reference components, and you see this is the one I used before, and this is the one I just shared with the community all over again. I can like it, and actually I will ask you to like it right now. If you go now in the chat, I will share with you the link so that you can actually like the component I just shared with you. You can go through the description to understand what the component does, but let's actually go to my profile. I go to my profile and I can see all the components I like recently. I really like this one by Armin. I think Armin is here in the chat right now, and it's quite a cool one. But besides going through my feed of like components, you can go in the spaces and you can go in new simplified filter space I just created. And this is a new feature we're still deciding how to share with the community, the idea of adding people so that they can also add and modify the component I just shared. So a shared space. So like, for example, let me add Marit really quickly, and here we go. Let me add here Temesgen, who is also here with us like Marit. I hope Temesgen added, there we go. And then I save changes, and they also have the opportunity to add their components, to modify my components, to use a workflow using my components, and to go together collaborating to create a serious open source project that other people can reuse. Now, this is just an intro to give you an overview of what is all possible. So now what I'd like to do is to go back to the slides and cover all the aspects of all those many components. I already shared the page with you. It's knime.com/verified components. On there, actually, let me show you really quickly. If you go on knime.com verified components, you can find all the most recent components we shared, the different spaces of the KNIMers working on this. You can see Temesgen here and many others. And you can actually browse all these different categories. But what's really interesting of this link here is that we are going to highlight here components that are not made by us, KNIMers, KNIME employees, but made by the community, by you. In this case, SJ Porter, I don't know if he's right now with us in the Zoom call, released with us, with the community, 2 great components that we have seen as many downloads. And so we took them and we also shared them and reported them here. And you can then click and go and see this crazy nice component that is creating ID with a sophisticated way by SJ Porter, who is a strong community member and I. So I urge you to start sharing in order to get on the page, in order to also get feedback from us and improve your components with our help. So this is all about open source, about the community. Let's now go back here and reopen the slides. So this is the team behind the verified components. Temesgen, Marit, Monty, Lada, and Francisca are here with us. And there are many other KNIMers working with us to get all those components out. And I think it's a huge effort from offices all around the world of KNIME, and also many different nationalities. Today, before we start the actual session where we go through the 3 different groups of exercise, we're going to cover complex aspects of components in order to make them this robust. And those are the different aspects I would like to cover, and I will try to be as clear as possible. It's a lot of content. Some of you might have already seen this in the courses of earlier this week, but I would like to give a special focus that here the focus is to share reliable components. So let's start with the configuration nodes and configuration of a component. So configuration nodes are available by default when you install KNIME. You drag and drop them in your component, and they can then control its execution via flow variable. Those are the best way usually to create flow variable, and they in the end build a component dialog. So let me show you what I mean. This is a component by Marit, and you can see she's using a lot of configuration nodes. And you can then see that when you open the component dialog, you double click on the component and you are able to control it. And each element in the dialog of the component is coming from one of those nodes. So you double click, calculate recurring values. You see here 5 drop downs. This is because we have 5 configuration nodes inside of the component. Great. Then once you have those configuration dialog, you have your settings, you can decide what the user can select, but how do we actually control the workflow once those configurations are decided? It is all about flow variables. So those flow variables, usually created by the configuration nodes, can be edited, can be enhanced, can be made can be edited with also other nodes, but can also be used. You can take data and transform it into flow variables. And once you have this flow variable, you can control the settings of a node. This is really important. The settings of a node is no more controlled by a user, but it's controlled by a flow variable. And it's also important that a component, unlike a meta node, is able to confine which flow variables stay inside of the component and which flow variable instead can only be on the outside or can be moved from inside the component to outside the component. This is a big difference with meta nodes because meta nodes cannot have this and components always have this. So I think it's really important to stress this out, that if you have many flow variables, use a component to be able to contain them. Now, you have, for example, here a node which has this target column, and you want to have the target column of this model to be automatically adjusted with a component. For this, you need to have, for example, a common selection configuration node. This creates, in this case, the target column age that you want to predict. You connect the flow variables to the learner node. You go inside the learner node. You can, yes, you can select it again, but ignore the target column drop down, because now you can go directly in the flow variable tab and select the target column. And from now on, it only matters what the configuration node exports in order to execute the learner node. And this is just a sneak preview of how you can control the workflow with flow variable. Now, another important thing is not about controlling the execution of a node with different settings. We can decide whether I want to execute this node or I want to execute this other node. To do this, we use switch nodes. So how do you use switch nodes? You have a rule engine variable. The rule engine variable defines whether it's port 0 or port 1, and then this rule engine variable can be connected with a configuration node. So the configuration node determines the rule engine variable. The rule engine variable determines this case switch node. The case switch node determines which branch is executed. The branch is, in the end, a sequence of nodes. And this way, you can really decide, okay, if the user selected this, go this way. If the user selected that, goes this other way. And I find this is super important in order to get a robust component. All right. Third point, super also important. Sometimes the component has to fail because the user selects something wrong. The user provides some data that makes no sense to the component, and the component is obviously failing. So instead of just making it fail in some obscure way, you use a breakpoint node. What does that mean? The breakpoint node will fail depending on the condition that you give. So let's say, for example, here, I have a component which has an empty table, And I have here another table, which is instead not empty. So the component will check whether the input is empty or not empty thanks to the breakpoint node. And the breakpoint node will fail, the component will fail, and the error, the custom error that you set up in the breakpoint settings will be shown on the outside of the component. So please use breakpoint nodes because these give a really clear instruction to how to make the component work with the right settings. All right, now it gets a bit more advanced. So let's test your KNIME Pro skills, all right? This is about doing really complex algorithm like control of the workflow inside of the component. We're talking about try-catch nodes, for example. This is about the idea, okay, you know what? The user wanted to execute something, but we only were able to execute 9 out of the 10 options he selected. One option didn't work. And why do you need to make the entire component fail if only one option did not work, right? So we can use try-catch nodes to say, okay, try this out. If it doesn't work, still give something in return or try some other strategy. And this is ultimately what it gets really robustness, right? Because you can try different strategy, depends on what fails and what does not fail. Loop nodes. We said that you can control on how a node executes based on the overall data, but sometimes you need to change the node settings, not based on simply some user settings or some flow variable, but you need to change the node settings for each possible row, for each possible column, for each possible element in a list. And loop nodes will let you do that. So you can change the node settings for each iteration, and the iteration can be defined in different ways. And then this is new. It comes with a new extension, integrated deployment. But in this particular case, it's not really about deployment, about KNIME server, and about this. This is about the idea that you can use the capture nodes of integrated deployment to export a function, to basically capture a sequence of nodes that will be then exported in a way they can be reused anywhere in KNIME. Right? So the idea is that sometimes you want to export something, and this something is not just a single predictor node, but it's 10 nodes together. You can capture them and then export them with a particular port and then reuse it anywhere in the world. So here things are getting a bit fuzzier, right? We are telling you so many complex things together. So let me show you here those three concepts in one. We have here a component that doesn't do any crazy machine learning AutoML thing. It's simply creating a REST function. And this REST function needs to be created by among many others that are possible in the data. And once you execute this, you can then reuse the REST function anywhere you want in the KNIME workflow. And how did we do this? Here to show you some complexity, this is only an example, of course. We can go for each column. We try to capture a GET request based on the column settings and export this GET request along with the data if it works out in the catch, and then we get the best and we export it out. As you can see here, it feels a bit like coding, right? You have a loop, you have a try-catch, you are defining a function, but still, even for these complex things, it's much, much easier to not have to deal with code syntax and to just use those nodes altogether. Okay, so this, I hope I didn't. Let's now go back in a more solid ground on composite views and dashboards. So component views. You can use component views to visualize results of the data or to actually re-execute a component with new settings. This depends on what you want to do. In the end, you can open the interactive view of a component, just like any view of any node, and inside there you have a complex setup that you can use to, again, re-execute the component or simply to show the results. Now, if we talk about re-executing the component with new settings, we are definitely talking about widget nodes. Widget nodes are really similar to configuration nodes, but the point is that they offer a way to change the settings of the workflows by the interactive view. So instead of having the component dialog, you use the interactive view to change settings. Now, the problem here is that the interactive view is given to you only after the component is executed. So if you need to define settings before the component, the view is executed, the component is executed, then it's kind of hard to use widget. But in some cases where the workflow is quite it can be executed over and over again, and it's not also computation expensive, it's actually really nice. And that's exactly the example with the range slider I showed you before. Now, in those cases where, for example, you have a really complex automated procedure like AutoML, then to have all the models trained in order to have a view to change which model is training, then it's kind of killing the purpose. You want to decide first what are the models that should be trained, and afterwards see the models trained. So in those cases, widget nodes should go in another component upstream. So where is my mouse? Here, settings view will have all the widget nodes. Those widget nodes create flow variables. Flow variables control the configuration nodes of the AutoML components, and the AutoML component then can execute without, you can control the widget nodes without waiting the AutoML component to execute. This is really important. Okay, another topic here is about interactive filters. In fact, there's two widgets that are especially useful for interactivity. Those are the interactive range slider filter widget and the interactive value filter widget. Those two filter widgets are interactive. You can use them, one on numerical data and the other one on categorical data. And by chaining many of them, you can really browse and filter a lot your data using those interactivity. So again, they act like widgets, but they are really useful in building interactive views. Now, beside these two nodes, you need to use them and combine them with the view nodes. The view nodes give you the possibility to create many different visualizations. We have many JavaScript nodes built by us, the KNIME nodes, JavaScript nodes, but also Plotly nodes, an integration with Plotly that really, they work super similarly to our JavaScript nodes. You can combine them together to build a combined view. And let me show you an example here. We only added a parallel coordinates plot to the visualization of before. And thanks to the filter, we can browse all those different curves on the parallel coordinates plot by color, thanks to also the color manager node. The color manager node is super important here to work with those interactive views. Next, there is the layout panel. The layout panel is actually super useful to define and customize the looking of your dashboard. User-friendly because it's all drag and drop. I really like to open those padding on the side by having additional columns. Then I really like to drag and drop more nodes, define sometimes what is the maximum height in pixel of the chart. And in this case, 200 pixels was totally fine for the parallel coordinates plot. And then I'm going to add two more columns here to add the interactive filter widget and the table view. So you can see that by simply dragging and dropping, you can really build a complex dashboard with this. You need to have some UX concept in mind, but in the end, it's not coding, it's not HTML, it's rather easy. Now, this is a bit more advanced, but it lets you do incredible things. Nested components in composite views. The idea to execute a dashboard or to execute another dashboard and then decide to show only one of them. So this idea here is super useful to really have complex dashboards. Let me show you an example. We have here a dashboard that, in this case, when you open it, it shows those violin plots, right? Those violin plots are coming from inside the components that there is a nested component with those violin plot node, range slider node, and so on. Now, let's hope that this GIF is then closing. And then we should see, you see that you can even have the filter as a twin list. And then you can also see that the same view is able to open a total different view, which instead of the violin plot and the bubble chart, you have a parallel coordinates plot and a table view. How can you control which dashboard is showing? It's because you're controlling from a configuration node which nested component is activated and rendered to the user. So again, if you have a really complex dashboard which should show different things in different situations, nested components is the right way to do this, with each of them the different layout, the different composite views, and then you activate the right one. All right, so a bit about component appearance and metadata. We have here the idea that we want to use the ports of components and to customize them. How do you do that? You need to right-click on a component. In this case, we add a new port. And the way that you add new ports is actually to right-click on them and to actually go there in the component and set up. I showed this before in the demo. And in here, you can add all the ports you want and so on. This is just a brief idea that you can always customize what's written below the component. If there is an important message for the user to see right away, you can write it here, and when you share it, the message should still be there. Another idea is exactly now the components are also colorful with all those logos and so on. What about those gray components we used to have? The gray components are becoming colorful because there is this description panel available inside of the component that you can use to add, for example, decide the color. For example, here we decide green with the learned category, and then we drag and drop this bulb icon, and there we go. Now the component is much more looking beautiful and so on. Of course, the description and all the different information about the ports can also be added in this description panel. Here is an important thing that it's a bit hidden. I would like to highlight. The configuration nodes have this description place. In this description place, you write down the description, and this description is rendered in the end in the description of the component itself. So select with this setting which column you want to predict is also available on the KNIME app page. You can see here again, select which setting, which column you want to predict. And this string was not given in the description panel, but was given via the single configuration node settings. All right, this part I already covered is about sharing components to and from KNIME Hub. So the idea that you can create public spaces, like I showed you before in the demo, it's all about right-click, create new space. The idea of sharing components by going component share, and you share it with the community. The idea of using other components, I really like automated visualization component because automatically visualize anything for you. And again, you can drag and drop it directly in your workflow. And then shared component links. This is important. Let's say that we update a bug that we found in this complex component, and you want to update it in your own workflow. Always make sure that you are up to date by going to component and then update link. And then you will know if there is a new update. And then finally, we have collaboration spaces. This already is not available yet, but I think it gives you an idea of how far we are going with people in the open source space that can collaborate together in a space publicly available, and they all have right access to go on and make a component more and more workflow. Especially if you think in education also, when students need to work together, this is also a great feature that is coming up, and we still are deciding how to make it available.